So for this video, we're going to be talking about appositives. And we're going to start with the definition and the rule for when you need to use commas. But if you don't understand it right away, don't worry. This is one of the trickier comma rules on the outset of it. But once you look at a few examples, you'll start to get a feel for what is an appositive and when we need to use commas for it. So appositives are when you have a noun or noun phrase that renames a noun or noun phrase within a sentence. Or noun phrase within a sentence. And so what's important to know is that not all appositives will need commas. So the rule is that you only need commas when you have grammatically non-essential appositives, which sounds really confusing and arbitrary. So grammatically non-essential appositives must be set off by commas. If they're at the beginning or the end of the sentence, then it would just be one comma. So what does it mean for something to be grammatically non-essential? It's important to remember that grammatically non-essential just means within the context of grammar. It's not about whether or not it's important to you. So this sentence right here is going to show an appositive that's grammatically non-essential. My first cat, Scout, was an orange tabby cat. We have commas here to show that this is an appositive that really isn't necessary. If we took out Scout, first, we'd still have a full independent clause. My first cat was an orange tabby cat. But more importantly, we wouldn't lose any meaning to the sentence, and our reader would clearly still understand who we are talking about here. Because I don't have two first cats. My first cat was an orange tabby cat. And so I've made it clear who I'm talking about, and whether or not that name is included, the reader will still understand the meaning. So that's why we would absolutely need those commas there. Now, let's look at this sentence. This is going to show an example of an essential appositive. The famous conservationist Rachel Carson wrote one of the most influential books on protecting the environment. So here, our appositive is Rachel Carson. The famous conservationist Rachel Carson wrote one of the most influential books. We are not going to have commas here, because remember, if we put commas on either side, then that's saying that that information isn't necessary. And if we took Rachel Carson out just as a test, it would say the famous conservationist wrote one of the most influential books. Suddenly, we have no idea who we're talking about. We need this this phrase, this name, this proper noun in here to better understand who we're talking about. So in these next two examples, there are no commas. We have to decide whether or not the appositives in here are essential or non-essential. Remember, non-essential means you need commas. So non-essential equals commas. Desmond Tutu, the famous theologian, was set to speak at noon. So our appositive here would be the famous theologian. So if we took that out, Desmond Tutu was set to speak at noon, we confirm that this is an appositive because without it, the sentence still works. But is it essential or non-essential? This is going to be non-essential, meaning that we need commas here because it's unnecessary information. Without it, it says Desmond Tutu was set to speak at noon. We still know who it is. So without that information, the sentence doesn't lose any meaning. So we leave the commas. My two sisters, Ashley and Keely, live and work in the same city. So my two sisters, Ashley and Keely being the appositive, This would also be non-essential because I've already said I have two sisters, and without it, it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. So I was trying to get rid of that here. There we go. So here we would also need commas because it's not that important. If we don't have those names in there, and not to say those names aren't important or don't have value, but in a grammatical sense, they don't, because I said my two sisters and made it clear who I'm already talking about. So the funny thing is that just by rearranging the sentence, you can change the appositive. So if we said, the famous theologian Desmond Tutu was set to speak. And you know the rest of the sentence. This would become our appositive, but it would be necessary because much like the sentence before, the famous conservationist, if we took out Desmond Tutu, suddenly we wouldn't know who this famous theologian was. So it's all about whether or not the appositive, or rather the removal of the appositive, takes away vital information. If it does, you won't need commas. But if it's really clear exactly who you're talking about, or which animal you're talking about, like in this sentence, then you are going to need those commas because we actually don't need this information right here to understand the sentence as a whole. Again, appositives can take a little bit of time to understand. There are more resources linked in the description of this video.